This is another of the very inexpensive knives. That's another Santoku. Like many modern Santokus, it has your sort of cushioning sort of grip, which is contoured to give you a bit more comfort. This has one of the nicer grips for a number of reasons. It's properly swelled, yeah, most knives are these days. It has a thumb ramp here, which is very nice when you're doing heavier cuts because it allows you to change the way you're applying force. And for fatigue issues, if you're not used to doing a lot of work in the kitchen, being able to switch to sort of pressing with your thumb and doing heavier work is a nice change from basically a pinch cut or, you know, your regular hammer type grip. So I found that really useful, and a number of people that I showed it to, I just did a few basic demonstrations, really liked it because again they could change how they were cutting. Very nice feature. The handle right here where it flows into the edge is not ideal. It's not fully rounded, it's not swelled, so you still feel it a bit when you're doing pinch grips, but it's not squarish. You know, so I'd call it good. It's not great, but it's not horrible. So it's a positive for the knife. It still has a relatively squarish spine, it still has a relatively squarish heel, so when you're doing basically grips right up on the spine, it is kind of uncomfortable. And when you do heavy pinch grips forward and your index finger is ramping against the heel, kind of uncomfortable again. For a long time though, this was rating relatively highly among the inexpensive blades that I used for a couple of reasons. While the curvature, the belly, is not ideal, it's not a bunch of flats. It does have some curvature to it. It's not 100% smooth. This is a $4 knife. But you can do rocking cuts with it. You do get that nice gentle motion. That's a positive, very clearly. The combination of hollow grind, relatively thickish sort of edge bevel, around 25 thou, and Grantons, made the wedging ability on potatoes, the sticking ability, one of the better of the least cost knives that I've seen. Again, not perfect. Potatoes stick on occasion. But for the inexpensive knives, this is easily the best performer in that regard. And it has all the usual, you know, aspects of a Santoku, which sort of attempts to blend a cleaver and a chef's knife sorted together. Very awkward, of course, for paring, peeling type work, but much more suitable for chopping than a chef's knife, again trying to blend a bit of a cleaver into it. It does have, however, a couple of significant disadvantages. One, relatively minor and fixable. The initial sharpness was excellent in this area, the first 25% of the blade. It scored among the sharpest of the inexpensive knives and is easily rankable in terms of all the knives I've seen. It's that sharp. The combination of direct push cutting sharpness and drawing or slicing sharpness is among the best of the knives that I've seen, not just in this class. Excellent in this area. 75% of the blade, however, was visibly dented, dinged, rolled, damaged. And unfortunately, this is the area that you do most of your rocking cuts in. So when you're trying to cut green onions, when you're trying to cut up, say, sausages and stuff like that, you don't get smooth cuts. That's kind of unfortunate, and it is kind of frustrating. So someone would buy this knife and they could, you know, really get off on the wrong track with it because of that. And the sharpness is so low that you won't make complete cuts on green onions. You won't make complete cuts on sausages in this area when you're trying to do rocking cuts. You have to do draw cuts through this little small section of tip. And again, you can't slice tomatoes with this area. You can't trim meats or fats with this area. You're left with just a little section of the tip. However, sharpen a knife takes care of that. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking, hey, you know, this is a nice knife, nice and comfortable. Had some really positive grip advantages. No real issues with the grip. Doesn't absorb fluids, doesn't absorb any kind of scents. Exposed the handle for around 4 to 5 seconds to open flame. Just started to smolder. Really nice standout, nice curvature of the blade. Yes, of course, the edge was a bit dinged up. The tip didn't come 100% sharply formed, but again was standing out relatively positive. Unfortunately for the knife, unfortunately for the evaluation, in the last couple of weeks I started preparing some more traditional Newfoundland dishes, and one of them is a traditional meal with salt meat and has a lot of very thick vegetables, cabbages, turnips, that type of deal. And while the raw cutting ability was nice, and again, this has some really nice advantages, really nice positive features. The edge, for example, had one of the nicest blends of cutting ability and durability that I've seen. 17 degree per side edge with a 25 thou thick bevel gives it that much durability that you can easily, say, cut the knuckles right off chickens. And you can see that in the video on the XM18, where I use the XM18 to do some heavy bone cutting, and then I swap this in right alongside of it. So this knife, Very nice in that respect. It's just at that level. It's not ridiculously overbuilt, like the Wiltshire carving knife that I talked about a while ago, which has slided that much towards durability. That's not much of a functional cutting tool anymore. But this is just durable enough that you can sort of do some bone work on chickens, and you can separate the legs and the thigh, and you don't really care where you place the knife. You can cut the carcass up for boiling down for stock, chop the knuckles right off the legs, no problems, with a nice strong heel strike. Very positive. On turnips though and cabbages, you hit a bit of an issue. You'd go to cut through and the blade would scow off to the side. And the first few times that it happened, I figured, oh, I'm just not pressing correctly, you know. I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. So I did and stopped and just couldn't make straight cuts. And then I looked down at the primary grind very carefully, and the primary grind is much deeper on one side. So much so that it starts to have that behavior of a chisel grind, where it's flat on one side and ground on the other, and basically you get that scalloping effect where the blade sort of moves into the food because, of course, the forces on it are uneven. So that's a very difficult fix. And while most people can fix the initial damaged edge by sharpening it, can fix the fact that it doesn't have a point, because the first time you sharpen it, you'll basically bring the edge up and you'll form a point. Resetting the primary bevel is probably going to be the death stroke for most people, because they're not going to put the effort into making the primary bevels even. And the first time that they do, you know, deep cuts through a cabbage or a turnip or your watermelons or squashes, and the knife boom scows off to one side, it's sort of a dangerous type thing. Plus they're just going to be aggravated and not use it. Now, does this happen on this brand, on this knife? Who knows? This is a one-shot sample. If this is the only inexpensive knife that I've seen it happen yet, hopefully this is just an example of me getting unlucky, and not all of these are like this, because that's, again, the real standout for that. Up until that sort of happened, I was putting this sort of at the top of the heap of the inexpensive knives, because it didn't have any real other significant detractions. Other than that, I was putting this, you know, near the top of the inexpensive knives, and like I said, it not only didn't have significant problems, it had a lot of very positive features, and even for corrosion resistance, there was no spotting, no rusting when I was doing, you know, fruit work, acidic type work. Would not clean the blade, would not dry the blade, just let it there for the whole time I was preparing foods. And again, you're working around like salt meat, salted water, that type of deal. No issues. And I even did a 24-hour soak in white vinegar, where I took just a normal tissue, put it in a very small square, about the size of a silver dollar, put it on the blade, super saturated it with white vinegar, and then left it overnight for 24 hours, take it off, and nothing, no corrosion. So again, excellent in terms of corrosion resistance, no spotting, excellent blend of cutting ability and durability. I would, you know, this is the kind of knife that I would give to someone for use in the kitchen, and you wouldn't have to say to them, you know, okay, now this has a very fine edge, watch what you're doing. And when you get your edge in that 5 to 15 thou area, you sort of want to say that, depending on how the primary grind supports the edge. Because otherwise someone could go, hey, there's a turkey, I need to separate, you know, the leg and the thigh, kablam, and jam. They'll actually buckle the primary grind or take a piece out of it. You're not going to do that. Now, I wouldn't use this to chop the knuckles off turkey legs. Stainless steel, hollow grind, 25 thou thick is a bit off for that, because the hollow grind will tend to pinch and roll, and you'll buckle the edge. But for chickens, yeah, no problem. So overall, just to hit a few highlights, exceptionally sharp, damaged, excellent combination of cutting ability and durability, up to the point where it can do very fast and very coarse work on chickens. No issues. Comfortable handle, secure handle, very versatile, no standout problems. Very easy to grind steel. The edge came basically heat damage and cold worked, so I had to remove all that damaged material. Once that was done, excellent shield sharpen, grinds very easily, minimal burr formation, and forms just an edge that push cuts newsprint exceptionally well. And this is, again, is just off a cheap bench stone, no further refinement on anything finer or any kind of stropping or any kind of rod work or anything like that. And again, $4 knife on sale, regular $6. Not a bad little Santoku if you like Santokus. In regards to sharpening, this grinds very easily. I use the cheapest stone that I have, which has the slowest cutting ability, and it easily reground the edge. Now, unfortunately, like most relatively inexpensive knives, and this isn't even uncommon on relatively expensive knives, the edge bevel is quite uneven. So the first time you go to sharpen it, you will apex the edge in certain parts, you will come close to apexing it in other parts, and in some parts you'll do nothing but just hit the shoulder. It won't even come close to the actual edge. So the angle on this was 17 degrees per side on average, but it went over and went under in certain spots. So the first time you sharpen it, you sort of make a decision as what you want to do. And I reground the entire edge to around 12 degrees per side. That's not picked like I sat down and said I want it to be 12 degrees per side. I reground it at an angle which was very comfortable for me to hold and one that I'm used to, which tends to be 10 to 12 degrees per side. And that angle was developed because that angle works very well for me over quite a broad scope of work. It's the angle that I use for finishing on some edges as a micro bevel, and it's the angle that I use as the main bevel on some other knives, so it has double duty work. Now, in terms of kitchen knives, and in this one, 10 to 12 degrees per side for your main bevel angle is a bit high. But again, first pass, just getting it where I want it to be. Reground, relatively easy. Unfortunately, it had another problem which is very, very common on cheap knives and also kind of common on relatively expensive knives, unfortunately. The edge burred very heavily. Some people jump to the erroneous conclusion that that's a problem with the steel or heat treat or start rambling about grains and carbides. 99.9% of the time it's because the edge was burnt at the factory. And the overheated edge and power strapping combined to make something that's burnt, overheated, and now has been fatigued by the constant cold working. So when you go to grind it, you get this big floppy burr because you're trying to form an edge on weakened steel. And it only came out to be about 50% of what I would consider to be optimal sharpness given the time and abrasive constraints. Now it still shaves and slices newsprint and sort of catches newsprint on a 45 and a push cut. But you can tell the difference between a knife that's sort of sharp and one that really, really approaches this phenomenal level of sharpness where it sort of apexes very cleanly, very easily. This one didn't do that. And as soon as I looked at it under magnification, I saw that even after going through the normal steps for burr minimization, there was still a significant burr that I could see under 50 times magnification. The steel is weak. So anyway, I do some cutting work with it, cut up some cardboard, and as expected, the edge retention is relatively low, because again, what happens is that initial burr collapses, smashes straight down into the rest of the edge, peels it all back, and then you get this fracturing behind the edge where the burr is collapsing and breaking apart. So the edge retention is much lower. And that's again where some people jump to erroneous conclusions and say, oh, the steel is off, the heat treatment is off, or some such gibberish. And again, it's weakened steel. So, assuming that it's weak in steel and the steel isn't flawed or has inclusions or whatever, you test the simplest thing first. You're trying to do any kind of experiment. So, take the edge, grind a stone straight across the top of it, grind back into that weakened metal, grind it all off. Reset the edge again. This time, forms really perfectly. And off the shaping, as I said in one of my other videos, sharpening is basically a three-step process. And the first is de-stressing, and the second one is shaping, just getting the bevel to the right shape. It's now as sharp as it was the first time after I had sharpened it. And then when I sharpen it, bang, it immediately picks up that very high sharpness, and it's right on top of the sharper knives that I have, again, in this class with the time constraint and abrasive constraint. So no issues with the steel, no issues with the heat treatment on this knife. But like most production knives, and even you can catch them on some relatively high-end production and custom knives, watch your bevel when you get it, because it's most likely going to be cold work and heat damaged, and that's a brutal combination on a knife. It ends up in a knife that's very fragile, very prone to damage, horrible edge retention, and the first time you sharpen it can be an actual nightmare. The edge will not form cleanly, it will burr excessively, and removing that burr will be next to impossible. That's one of the reasons why, as a general rule, when you work with a knife, don't try to jump to conclusions really fast. Sharpen it at least a few times and see if there's any improvement. If you get any improvement at all, keep sharpening it until that improvement stops, and then you know, okay, this is the performance of the knife. If you get no improvement and it's responding, you know, the same time after time, then you could likely have a problem. There's a few things you can do to check that out. But the main thing is, again, just give it another shot, sharpen it again, and see how it holds up. And most of the time, you'll see dramatic improvement the next time you sharpen it. And unfortunately, that problem causes a lot of people to make dramatic, erroneous mistakes about edge angles. So they'll get a knife like this at 17 degrees per side on average, as I said. They'll resharpen it to say, you know, 15 degrees per side because they read something about that on the internet. They go to use it, the edge retention is really poor, and they say, oh no, geez, it must be because 15 degrees is too low. So they try 20 or 25 degrees per side, and the edge retention is much better. And then they say, oh geez, well this obviously needed that high of an angle. It actually didn't. All it needed to do was be sharpened one more time, and that would have got rid of the weakened steel. So you're forming a correlation to the wrong actual properties. And even though something happened at the same time something else happened, that doesn't mean the two of those things are causally linked. One is causing the other. And the most famous example of that people throw out in stats classes all the time is they say that pirates are responsible for stopping global warming. And if you do a graph and you show global warming, and you show it steadily increasing, and you also show the percentage of pirates or number of pirates, you see it steadily decreasing. So as the number of pirates in the world go down, global warming effects go up. Well, obviously pirates must be the people that stop global warming. We need to get more pirates back, and then we would stop global warming. So that's complete nonsense. Pirates really don't have anything to do with global warming. But it shows you how you can easily lead to an erroneous conclusion, and what seems to be on the facts, logical, maybe. These two things happen at the same time, and they're happening almost sort of to the same extent, but they're not causally linked. So again, you get a knife, sharpen it, have really bad results the first time, change something. Oh, you know what the issue is? Oh yeah, I've read it. This is a stainless steel, so it responds better to diamonds instead of, a natural sort of stone. So I'll try diamonds the second time. And you try a diamond stone the second time, and now, wow, it gets really sharp, and your edge retention is great. And for the rest of your life, you're convinced that stainless steels require diamond sharpening stones. They don't. But again, you've made that connection because something happened at the same time something else happened. Again, it's simply because you sharpened it the second time, you removed the weakened metal. Not because you used a diamond stone, not because you changed the angle, or not because maybe you're a pirate.